The worst heartbreak isn't catching your husband with another woman. It's realizing everyone else knew before you did. Claire Crawford tightened her fingers around the small navy blue gift box as the taxi pulled up outside Bellamy's Steakhouse in downtown Manhattan. Rain shimmered across the sidewalks under the city lights while black SUVs lined the curb like silent guards protecting the rich from the rest of the world. Tonight was supposed to be different. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of pretending their relationship began as a cold business arrangement instead of a love story. But Claire had spent weeks planning this anniversary dinner because lately, Ethan had started looking at her differently. Softer. Longer. Like the walls around his heart were finally breaking down. She stepped out onto the wet pavement carefully, smoothing her cream-colored coat over her black dress. Inside the gift box was the vintage silver watch Ethan once mentioned wanting when he was 23 and broke. Back before he became billionaire CEO Ethan Crawford. Back before the private jets, headlines, and million-dollar deals. Claire smiled to herself as she entered the restaurant quietly, hoping to surprise him before his business dinner ended. But the second she approached the private dining room, she stopped breathing. Through the glass wall, Ethan sat beside Vanessa Hale. Beautiful, elegant, dangerous in the effortless way wealthy women always seem to be. Vanessa leaned close to him, her manicured hand resting lightly against his shoulder while crystal champagne glasses sparkled between them. Ethan didn't move away. Claire's pulse slowed painfully as laughter erupted around the table. Then one of Ethan's friends smirked and raised his drink. "Come on, Ethan," he joked loudly. "You should have married Vanessa from the beginning." More laughter followed. Claire waited for Ethan to shut it down, to defend her, to say his wife's name. But Ethan only looked down at the table silently while Vanessa smiled beside him. That silence shattered something inside her. Claire suddenly noticed details she wished she hadn't. A lipstick stain on Ethan's champagne glass. A white cloth. Napkin with the gold logo of a luxury Paris hotel. Vanessa whispering something that made the others laugh again. Claire felt humiliation crawl slowly up her spine as one of the women at the table glanced toward the glass wall and noticed her standing there. Their eyes met for one unbearable second before the woman leaned toward another guest and whispered something that made them both smile knowingly. Claire understood immediately. They all knew. Every single person in that room knew her marriage had started with a contract. A temporary arrangement to protect the Crawford family image after Ethan's father died. But somehow, somewhere along the way, Claire had forgotten it was supposed to be temporary. She had fallen in love for real. Ethan still hadn't seen her standing there. He still hadn't looked up. Claire lowered her eyes slowly to the anniversary gift trembling in her hands. Then, with heartbreaking calmness, she placed the box quietly on the reception counter beside the private dining room and slid her wedding ring off her finger for the first time in 3 years. Some women cry the moment their heart breaks. Claire Crawford became terrifyingly calm instead. The cold Manhattan air hit her face as she stepped outside Bellamy's Steakhouse, but she barely felt it. Traffic lights reflected across the wet streets while couples hurried beneath umbrellas, laughing, holding hands, living ordinary lives that suddenly felt impossibly far away from hers. Claire stood frozen on the sidewalk for a moment, her wedding ring resting silently in her palm. 3 years ago, she signed a contract marriage believing it would protect Ethan Crawford's public image after his father's death shook the Crawford empire. The agreement was simple. Appear together. Save the company reputation. Stay emotionally detached. But somewhere between quiet breakfasts at 6 in the morning and late nights waiting for Ethan to come home from meetings, Claire had forgotten the rules. She had memorized how he took his coffee. She knew he hated thunderstorms, but pretended not to. She knew he still carried guilt over his younger brother's accident, even though nobody ever talked about it publicly. And worst of all, she had started believing Ethan loved her too. A black SUV slowed beside the curb, but Claire waved it away and began walking through the rain instead. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement while her vision blurred from tears she refused to let fall. Her phone buzzed twice inside her purse. Ethan. Then again. Ethan Crawford never called twice unless it mattered. Claire stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A few seconds later, a message appeared. Meeting is running late. I will make it up to you tonight. Claire let out a quiet laugh that sounded nothing like happiness. He did not even know she had been there. He did not know she heard every word. By the time she reached the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the city skyline had disappeared behind heavy rain clouds. The elevator doors opened directly into silence. Their home looked untouched. Perfect. Cold. Like a luxury hotel nobody actually lived in. Claire slowly removed her coat and walked toward Ethan's office. Her hands trembled as she opened the bottom drawer where the original contract still sat inside a leather folder. She stared at the signatures for a long time. Ethan Crawford, Claire Bennett, temporary marriage agreement, 36 months, public appearances mandatory, emotional involvement discouraged. The words suddenly felt crueler than betrayal itself. Claire swallowed hard and reached into her purse again. Carefully, she placed her wedding ring on top of the contract. Then she pulled out another envelope she had hidden for almost 2 weeks. Inside was a sonogram photo from her doctor appointment downtown. 8 weeks pregnant. Claire closed her eyes tightly as emotion crashed through her chest. Ethan did not know. She had planned to tell him tonight during their anniversary dinner. She imagined his reaction 1,000 times. Maybe surprise, maybe fear, maybe even happiness. But now all she could hear was another woman laughing beside him while his friends mocked their marriage like it was some temporary joke. Claire slipped the sonogram into the envelope beside the unsigned divorce papers she downloaded 3 nights ago but never planned to use until now. Then she placed everything neatly on Ethan's desk exactly where he would see it the second he walked in. Finally, Claire picked up one small suitcase and walked toward the elevator without looking back once. Ethan Crawford did not notice the anniversary gift sitting at the restaurant reception desk until nearly 40 minutes after Claire disappeared into the rain. By then, the private dinner had already ended, and the city skyline beyond the windows had turned dark beneath the storm clouds rolling over Manhattan. Ethan loosened his tie as he stepped away from the table, while Vanessa continued talking beside him about acquisition numbers and media coverage. He barely heard her anymore. Something had felt wrong all evening, like an invisible tension pressing against his chest. Then the hostess approached quietly holding a navy blue gift box. "Excuse me, Mr. Crawford," she said carefully. "Your wife left this for you earlier tonight." Ethan froze instantly. "Claire was here." The hostess nodded. "About an hour ago." Ethan grabbed the box so quickly the hostess startled slightly. His pulse began pounding hard as he opened it and saw the vintage silver watch inside. The exact model he once mentioned years ago during a sleepless night when he and Claire were still strangers living under the same roof because of a contract neither of them wanted. Beneath the watch sat a handwritten card in Claire's delicate script. "Happy anniversary. I finally understand now." Ethan read the sentence twice, then a third time. Every sound in the restaurant disappeared around him. "Where did she go?" he asked sharply. "I am not sure," the hostess admitted softly. Ethan was already pulling out his phone. Claire did not answer the first call, or the second, or the third. By the fourth attempt, his calm billionaire composure had completely cracked. Vanessa stepped closer. "Ethan, what happened?" He looked at her for the first time all night with visible frustration. "You should not have touched me in there." Vanessa blinked. "What?" "Claire saw us." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The silence at the table, the timing, the unanswered calls. Ethan suddenly remembered the exact moment he glanced toward the restaurant entrance earlier and thought he saw someone standing beyond the glass wall. Dear God. He pushed past everyone and headed straight into the storm outside, dialing Claire again. No answer. 25 minutes later, Ethan stormed into the penthouse, drenched from the rain. "Claire." His voice echoed through the empty apartment. Nothing. He walked farther inside and immediately noticed her coat was gone. Her suitcase too. A terrible feeling settled into his stomach. Ethan moved toward his office and stopped dead at the doorway. The contract marriage folder sat directly in the center of his desk. Claire's wedding ring rested on top of it beside a stack of unsigned divorce papers. Ethan stared at the ring in complete disbelief before slowly reaching for the final envelope underneath. The moment he opened it and saw the sonogram photo, all the air left his lungs. 8 weeks. Ethan's hand trembled violently for the first time in years. His eyes locked onto the tiny blurred image while memories crashed through his mind all at once. Claire smiling tiredly the past few mornings. Her sudden nausea last week. The way she almost said something important during breakfast 2 days ago, before his phone interrupted them. "No," he whispered hoarsely. Ethan sank slowly into the chair behind his desk, still staring at the sonogram like the world around him had stopped moving. Then he noticed something else tucked inside the envelope. A folded receipt from Bellamy's Steakhouse. On the back, written in Claire's handwriting, were 6 devastating words. I was finally starting to believe you. The moment Ethan Crawford realized Claire was carrying their child, the expensive penthouse around him stopped feeling like home and started feeling like punishment. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows while Manhattan glowed cold and distant below, but Ethan barely noticed any of it. He was still staring at the sonogram photo in his trembling hands. 8 weeks. Claire had been planning to tell him tonight. Their anniversary. His chest tightened painfully as memories replayed inside his head with brutal clarity. Claire standing quietly in the kitchen last Sunday morning, wearing one of his sweaters while reading something on her phone and smiling to herself. Claire suddenly leaving a charity luncheon because she felt sick. Claire touching her stomach absent-mindedly during breakfast 2 mornings ago before he rushed away to another meeting. Ethan shut his eyes hard. How had he missed all of it? His phone buzzed on the desk. Vanessa. Ethan ignored it immediately. Then it rang again. And again. Finally, he answered with visible anger already in his voice. What? Vanessa sounded confused. Ethan, you left the restaurant without saying anything. Are you okay? Claire saw us tonight. Silence hit the line. Then Vanessa sighed softly. I was afraid of that. Ethan stood abruptly from his chair. You should have told me she arrived. I did not know she was there until she left. Ethan pressed a hand against his forehead, exhausted and furious with himself. Everything is ruined. Vanessa's voice lowered carefully. Then tell her the truth. Ethan laughed bitterly under his breath. How exactly do I explain sitting beside my ex while my so-called friends joke that I married the wrong woman? Vanessa stayed silent for a moment before finally saying, You were trying to protect Claire. Ethan looked toward the divorce papers again. Protect her. God, the irony made him sick. Earlier that evening, the entire dinner with Vanessa had never been personal. Months ago, someone attempted to leak damaging photos from Claire's past before she married into the Crawford family. Old pictures designed to embarrass her publicly and destroy her reputation in high society. Vanessa, now a powerful media attorney, had tracked down the source and arranged the meeting to buy the files before tabloids got them. Ethan wanted the situation handled quietly because Claire already struggled enough feeling judged by his world. He planned to tell her after everything was resolved. But now none of that mattered anymore. Because Claire believed he betrayed her. And somehow that hurt more than Ethan thought possible. He suddenly remembered the joke at the restaurant table again. You should have married Vanessa from the beginning. Ethan's expression darkened instantly. Not once had he defended Claire loudly enough in front of those people. He thought bringing her into his world was enough. Providing for her was enough. Protecting her privately was enough. But tonight, for the first time, Ethan understood something terrifying. Claire had spent 3 years surrounded by people who viewed her as temporary while he stayed silent beside them. Another call interrupted his thoughts, this time from his head of security. Sir, the man said carefully, we tracked Mrs. Crawford leaving the penthouse around 10:17 p.m. She took one suitcase and dismissed the driver. Ethan's heartbeat quickened immediately. Where did she go? We are still checking traffic cameras. Ethan grabbed his coat without hesitation. Find her. Yes, sir. Ethan stopped briefly at the office doorway before leaving the penthouse. His eyes fell one last time on Claire's wedding ring resting beside the sonogram photo. For years he convinced himself their marriage began as an obligation. A business arrangement. Something temporary. But standing there alone in the silence she left behind, Ethan Crawford finally understood the truth too late. He was already hopelessly in love with his wife. Claire spent the first night after leaving Ethan Crawford in a small coastal motel nearly 4 hours from Manhattan, where the crashing waves outside sounded nothing like the endless noise of the city she had just abandoned. The room smelled faintly of salt water and old wood polish, and the single lamp beside the bed flickered every few minutes. But for the first time in years, nobody expected anything from her. Nobody watched her posture at charity galas. Nobody whispered about the contract wife who somehow married one of the most powerful billionaires in America. Claire sat quietly on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same black dress from dinner, while rain tapped softly against the motel window. Her suitcase remained unopened near the door because she still could not fully believe she had actually left. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Ethan. 23 missed calls now. 5 voicemails. Claire stared at the screen until it finally went dark again. Then she slowly picked up the phone and opened the very first voicemail he left nearly 3 hours ago. Claire. Ethan's voice came through unevenly, nothing like the calm billionaire the world admired. Please answer me. I know what this looks like. Claire immediately stopped the recording before he could continue. Tears finally filled her eyes for the first time all night. Because deep down, the most painful part was not what she saw at the restaurant. It was the terrifying possibility that Ethan might actually have an explanation good enough to make her stay. Claire leaned back against the headboard and rested a hand gently against her stomach. 8 weeks. The words still felt unreal. Earlier that morning, she stood alone in a pharmacy staring at a second pregnancy test because she did not trust the first one. She remembered laughing nervously through tears in the store parking lot while imagining Ethan's reaction. For one beautiful moment, she pictured them becoming a real family instead of 2 people hiding behind a contract nobody talked about anymore. But now every memory hurt. Claire opened her suitcase slowly and pulled out the folded copy of their marriage agreement she took from Ethan's office before leaving. The pages looked worn now from years hidden in drawers and ignored conversations. She reread the original terms quietly under the dim motel light. Public appearances mandatory. Emotional attachment discouraged. Divorce available upon mutual agreement after 36 months. Claire laughed softly through tears. 36 months ended next week. The timing almost felt cruel. Another voicemail notification appeared on her phone. This one was different. Shorter. Desperate. Claire hesitated before pressing play. You were never temporary to me. Her breathing stopped. Ethan's voice cracked painfully near the end of the sentence like he meant every word. Claire closed her eyes hard as emotion overwhelmed her chest again. Because Ethan Crawford was many things. Cold sometimes. Distracted constantly. Terrible at expressing emotions. But he had never lied to her directly, which made this so much harder. Suddenly her phone lit up again, but this time it was not Ethan. It was Vanessa Hale. Claire stared at the name in disbelief before answering cautiously. Claire, Vanessa said softly, I think you deserve to know the truth about tonight. Claire's fingers tightened around the phone instantly. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark ocean while her heartbeat pounded louder with every passing second. What truth? She whispered. And on the other end of the line, Vanessa finally told her why Ethan had really met her at the restaurant that night. Claire sat motionless on the motel bed while the ocean storm outside rattled the windows hard enough to make the old glass tremble. Vanessa Hale's voice remained calm on the phone, but every word felt like another crack spreading through the version of reality Claire had believed only hours earlier. The dinner was never romantic, Vanessa explained quietly. Ethan hired me 3 months ago because someone was threatening to leak private photos from your past to the tabloids. Claire frowned slightly through tears. What photos? Pictures from before you met him. Nothing scandalous. Just enough for the media to twist into humiliation. Ethan found out one of his investors planned to use them to force him into another merger deal. Claire's heartbeat slowed painfully as she listened. Vanessa continued carefully. Tonight we finalized the buyout for every copy. Ethan wanted everything erased before your anniversary because he knew how much the pressure from high society has already hurt you. Claire closed her eyes tightly. Suddenly, the dinner replayed differently in her mind. Ethan barely touching his champagne. Ethan looking distracted all evening. Ethan pulling slightly away whenever Vanessa leaned closer. The realization hurt almost worse than betrayal itself. Because Ethan had been trying to protect her while she walked away believing he never loved her at all. Why did he not tell me? Claire whispered weakly. Vanessa sighed softly on the other end. Because Ethan Crawford thinks protecting people means carrying everything alone. Silence filled the motel room except for the sound of waves crashing beyond the highway. Claire lowered her gaze to the sonogram photo resting beside her on the bed. 8 weeks. Her chest tightened painfully again. He still should have defended me, she admitted quietly. Those people laughed at our marriage like I was temporary. Vanessa did not argue. You are right, she said honestly. That is Ethan's biggest mistake. He spent so long pretending emotions were weakness that he forgot silence can hurt more than words. Claire swallowed hard as tears finally slid down her face. For years she accepted being tolerated by Ethan's world instead of embraced by it. Women at galas smiled politely before whispering behind champagne glasses. Business executives treated her like a placeholder beside Ethan instead of his actual wife. And Ethan always stayed calm, controlled, quiet. She used to mistake that silence for strength. Now she realized how lonely it made her feel. Suddenly, headlights flashed outside the motel window. Claire instinctively stood up and peeked through the curtains. A black SUV slowly passed along the coastal road before disappearing into the storm again. Her pulse quickened instantly. Ethan. Somehow she knew it had to be him. Her phone buzzed again before she could think further. This time it was another voicemail notification. Claire hesitated only a second before pressing play. Ethan's exhausted voice filled the room immediately. Claire, I know you are hurting, and you have every reason to be angry with me. But please do not disappear from me completely. His voice cracked softly before continuing. I saw the sonogram. Claire covered her mouth instantly as emotion overwhelmed her chest again. Ethan took a shaky breath on the recording. I should have told the entire world you were my wife the moment those people disrespected you. I should have spent 3 years proving you belonged beside me instead of assuming you already knew. Claire slowly sank back onto the edge of the bed while tears blurred her vision completely now. Then Ethan whispered the one thing she had secretly waited years to hear. I love you, Claire. Not because of a contract. Not because of obligation. I love you because somewhere along the way, you became the best part of my life. Outside, thunder rolled violently across the dark ocean, while another pair of headlights appeared slowly at the end of the motel parking lot. Claire's heartbeat pounded so hard she could barely hear the ocean anymore as the black SUV slowly stopped outside the motel office beneath the flickering neon sign. Rain poured across the windshield while the engine stayed running for several seconds. Then the driver's door opened, and Ethan Crawford stepped out into the storm wearing the same dark suit from dinner, completely soaked within seconds. Claire stood frozen behind the motel curtain, her breathing uneven as she watched him look around desperately beneath the parking lot lights. For the first time since she met him, Ethan did not look powerful. He looked terrified. Claire's phone buzzed again in her hand. Another message from him. Please do not leave before I can explain everything face to face. Her fingers trembled slightly around the phone as she stared at him outside. Part of her wanted to run into his arms immediately after hearing the truth from Vanessa, but another part still hurt too deeply to move. Ethan walked toward the motel office first, speaking quickly to the older woman behind the front desk, while rainwater dripped from his hair and jacket onto the floor. Claire could not hear the conversation, but she saw the woman glance nervously toward Claire's room before shaking her head carefully. Ethan exhaled heavily and rubbed a hand across his face in frustration. Then, slowly, he turned and looked directly toward Claire's motel window. Their eyes met through the rain-streaked glass. Claire stopped breathing. Ethan took one step forward before she instinctively stepped back inside the room. A few moments later, soft knocking echoed against her door. Neither of them spoke at first. The storm outside filled the silence between them, while Claire stood only inches away from the door with tears already forming again. Finally, Ethan's voice came through quietly. I know you are in there. Claire closed her eyes tightly. You should go back to Manhattan. I am not leaving without seeing you. His voice sounded exhausted now. Human. Vulnerable in a way she had never heard before. Claire pressed her forehead lightly against the door. Why now, Ethan? She whispered painfully. Why are you suddenly fighting for me now? Silence followed for several long seconds before Ethan answered honestly. Because I almost lost you before I realized you were the only thing in my life that actually mattered. Claire's chest tightened instantly. Outside, thunder shook the motel windows while Ethan continued speaking through the door. I spent years believing love was weakness because every relationship around me was built on money, power, or manipulation. Then you walked into my life with that ridiculous kindness of yours and somehow made this empty penthouse feel like home. Claire covered her mouth quietly as tears slipped down her cheeks. Ethan's voice lowered further. And instead of protecting your heart properly, I made you stand alone in rooms full of people who never deserved you. Claire finally opened the door slowly. Ethan stood there completely drenched from the rain, his expression full of exhaustion and regret. For a moment, neither of them moved. They simply stared at each other while years of unspoken feelings filled the silence between them. Ethan's eyes slowly dropped toward her stomach before returning to her face again with visible emotion. You were going to tell me tonight, he said softly. Claire nodded once. I bought the pregnancy test the same day I bought your anniversary gift. Ethan looked shattered by the sentence alone. Claire. She shook her head gently before he could step closer. Do you know what hurt the most? Her voice trembled now despite every effort to stay calm. Not Vanessa. Not even the dinner. It was realizing I spent 3 years trying to prove I deserved to stand beside my own husband. Ethan looked like the words physically wounded him. Claire wiped tears from her face slowly. I loved you enough to survive the contract. I just did not know if you loved me enough to end it. The storm finally began to calm just before sunrise, but the silence inside the motel room still felt heavy enough to break both of them apart. Claire stood near the window wrapped in a gray blanket, while pale. Morning light slowly spread across the ocean outside. Ethan had not left once during the entire night. He sat quietly in the worn motel chair across from her, still soaked from the rain earlier, his expensive suit wrinkled and forgotten. For years, Claire imagined what it would feel like to hear Ethan Crawford confess his love. She thought it would heal everything instantly. Instead, it only revealed how much pain had built between them while neither of them spoke honestly. Ethan finally stood slowly and walked toward her carefully, like he was afraid she might disappear again. I know saying sorry is not enough, he admitted quietly, but I need you to understand something. Claire looked at him without speaking. Ethan's voice lowered. I never kept you hidden because I was ashamed of you. I kept everything private because the moment people know what matters to me, they try to destroy it. Claire's eyes softened slightly, but the hurt remained. And while you were protecting me from strangers, she whispered, you forgot to protect me from loneliness. Ethan closed his eyes briefly because she was right. Completely right. He had spent years solving billion-dollar crises while ignoring the quiet heartbreak growing inside his own marriage. Claire turned away from him and looked back toward the ocean again. Do you know what I realized tonight? She asked softly. I could survive people judging me. I could survive the contract. I could survive your world never fully accepting me. Her voice trembled slightly now. But I could not survive feeling invisible to my own husband. Ethan stepped closer immediately. You were never invisible to me. Claire laughed sadly under her breath. Then why did it take me leaving for you to finally say all this? Ethan had no answer for several seconds. Then finally, he spoke with brutal honesty. Because I grew up in a family where love was never spoken out loud. My father taught me that providing for people was enough. Protecting them financially was enough. I thought giving you everything except vulnerability made me strong. His eyes filled with regret as he looked at her. But you needed a husband, not a bodyguard. Claire felt. Tears rise again because for the first time since she met Ethan Crawford, he was no longer hiding behind power or control. He was simply a man terrified of losing the woman he loved. Suddenly, Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly and pulled out something small wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Claire frowned slightly as he unfolded it in his palm. Her wedding ring. The receptionist at Bellamy's gave it back to me, he said quietly. Claire stared at the ring silently, while emotion tightened in her chest again. Ethan looked down at it before continuing softly. You left this behind because you thought our marriage was ending. Then he lifted his eyes to hers. But I came here because I want to finally start a real one. Claire's breathing became uneven again as Ethan stepped closer and gently took her hand. I cannot erase the damage I caused, he admitted. But I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never question your place beside me again. Before Claire could respond, Ethan's phone suddenly began vibrating loudly in his pocket. He ignored it immediately, but it kept ringing over and over until Claire finally glanced down at the screen and saw the caller ID. Crawford Foundation Gala Committee. Ethan sighed heavily. I forgot. Claire frowned slightly. Forgot what? Ethan looked at her carefully. Tonight is the annual Crawford Foundation Gala. Half of Manhattan's elite will be there. Claire instantly understood why his expression changed. The same people who mocked their marriage at dinner would all be in that ballroom tonight. Ethan slowly tightened his hold on her hand. And this time, he said quietly, I am done staying silent. By 7 o'clock that evening, the grand ballroom of the Crawford Foundation glittered beneath crystal chandeliers, while Manhattan's wealthiest families filled the room in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Champagne flowed freely. Camera flashes lit the marble entrance every few seconds. And hidden beneath all the elegance was the same quiet cruelty Claire had endured for 3 years. Conversations lowered the moment Ethan Crawford entered the ballroom beside his wife. Claire felt it instantly. The surprise. The whispers. The curiosity. She wore a simple dark blue gown Ethan personally bought from a boutique on their way back from the coast that afternoon, but what stunned the room was not the dress. It was Ethan himself. Because for the first time since anyone could remember, the billionaire who normally kept emotional distance from everyone never once let go of his wife's hand. Claire could feel his thumb brushing gently against her fingers as they walked deeper into the ballroom together. Every pair of eyes followed them. Then Ethan suddenly stopped near the center of the room when the same investor from Bellamy's Steakhouse approached, holding a champagne glass with a smug smile. "Well," the man joked lightly, "looks like the contract survived another week." A few nervous laughs spread nearby. Claire instantly felt old humiliation rise inside her chest again. But this time Ethan did not stay silent. Slowly, he turned toward the man with a calm expression that somehow felt more dangerous than anger. "You will never speak about my wife that way again." The entire ballroom went silent. The investor blinked awkwardly. "Ethan, come on, it was just a joke." "No," Ethan replied sharply. "The joke was me allowing people like you to disrespect the best thing that ever happened to me." Claire's breath caught instantly. Across the ballroom, even the musicians seemed to stop playing. Ethan stepped forward slightly, his voice steady enough for everyone nearby to hear. "For 3 years, Claire stood beside me while people treated her like she was temporary because our marriage began with a contract." He looked directly at Claire now, emotion visible in his eyes despite the crowded room watching. "What none of you understood is that somewhere along the way, she became my family long before I was smart enough to admit it." Claire felt tears rise immediately while stunned silence spread through the ballroom. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and slowly pulled out the folded marriage contract Claire left behind in the penthouse. Murmurs spread across the crowd as he held the papers up briefly before tearing them cleanly in half. Then again, and again, tiny pieces of paper drifted onto the ballroom floor beneath the chandeliers like falling snow. "This was supposed to define our marriage," Ethan said quietly. "But Claire loved me long after this contract stopped meaning anything." His voice softened as he turned fully toward her. "And now I intend to spend the rest of my life earning the love she already gave me freely." Claire could no longer stop the tears sliding down her face. Ethan gently reached up and brushed one away with his thumb before carefully taking her left hand again. Then, in front of the entire ballroom, he slid her wedding ring back onto her finger. "You are not temporary," he whispered softly enough that only she could hear. "You are my wife. You are the mother of my child. And you are the only home I have ever wanted." For the first time since walking into Bellamy's Steakhouse the night before, Claire finally smiled through tears instead of heartbreak. Around them, the ballroom remained silent for one breathtaking moment before applause slowly began spreading through the crowd. But Claire barely heard any of it anymore. Because after years of feeling invisible beside the man she loved, Ethan Crawford had finally chosen her loudly enough for the entire world to hear.